I've started making up the mould of the skull piece. I've used the paint on method. The first coating went on very, very thin. The second coat was a bit thicker, and the third coat was kind of like icing a cake. It was just about as thick as I could make it, and sort of allow that to sort of coat the entire surface. That's still going to be too flimsy on its own, so I'm going to have to make up a plaster mother mould of it. That's just about set now. It's ever so slightly tacky, but within the next hour that'll be ready. I had a little bit left over that I put on one of the elbow pieces. That still needs, you can see the fine coat there, and the thicker coat I started on the other side, and I ran out of material, so not a big deal, but that'll need a bit more as well. That may be solid enough with the thicker coat that it may not need a mother mould, but we'll see how it goes. But that skull piece definitely will. Whilst I've been waiting for the silicone to harden, I've decided to go back to some of the metal components. In particular, I'm starting to work on the left arm. Ironically, I've kind of forgotten a little bit how I actually built this one, so I've partially disassembled it so that I can make sure that I've got a matching set, and I'm just comparing the alignment for the fingers and for the pistons and that sort of stuff so that they're a comparable match to each other. I've got the wrist joint sort of worked out and the placement of the cable holes. These still need to be polished, so this is just a preliminary put together to make sure everything's sort of fitting the way it should. But so far so good. That's the elbow piece. I've tapped a hole in that there for the cuff to attach to it, and I've started setting the holes in position for where the pistons for the actual forearm will go. I've got all the cable components and that sort of stuff pre-made, so I'm not really missing a great deal. I will have to go and make up these little micro control rods. That is one thing that I'm missing a little bit from. Apart from that, it's really back down to the assembly sort of stage, where I just try to get it all back into one sort of piece and have the matching set. So I thought I'd show you a couple of tips on getting the metal cut straight. In particular, two tips. Number one, what I've got there is a big blob of wax, which I add to the blade. It acts as a lubricant on the actual saw blade. With aluminium in particular, if the metal heats up too much, you can actually get lodging in the blades, which will actually stop the blade from cutting. So the wax actually keeps the blade cooler and stops the blade from jamming up. The other tip that I'm going to give you is how to get a straight edge or a square edge when you're cutting tube or bar stock in particular. The real trick with it is a lot of the time when you actually try and run a piece of pipe or tubing through the blade can actually twist in the job, or you can be off angle and just end up with a piece that's crooked like that. The way to get around it is work out where you're going to cut it, and then as the blade goes, is actually spin with the rotation of the blade, so that you actually end up getting a square edge. I've got some pieces here in the bar stock aluminium that I'm making some custom universal joints off, and this is a little bit long, so I thought I'd just show you really quickly how that's done. That leaves you with a perfectly square, straight cut. I make the universal joint by cutting into the bar stock to form that U shape. From there, it's shaped a little further just to accommodate both pieces linking together. And then I drill in some holes ready for the universal joint hinge. To make up the centerpiece of the universal joint, what I'm actually using is some 1.6 gauge stainless steel wire. I sort of twist that into a that odd sort of number 4 sort of shape, so that I've got two overlapping pieces that hold themselves together. Once they're actually twisted in that shape, I give it a bit of a whack on a hammer to bring them down so that they're on the same plane, same level plane, and then from there it's just a matter of cutting out those individual pieces so that I've got a centerpiece for the universal joint. So once I've got my little pieces bent into shape, I'm using a 45% silver solder to actually create the joint. It works really well against the stainless steel, and provides a really solid join in the center there like that. and that creates the universal joint piece that I need. So once I've cut the loop part off those, I'm left with the T-type pieces, and I now need to basically just trim them down to a smaller size so that they fit in between the joint mechanism. I've left them open there like that so that the actual piece will fit, and then when I close those back down, that forms the joint. So once I've got them trimmed down smaller, it's just a matter of making sure that that's spread open far enough to get them through, and then it's just a little bit fiddly to actually feed them in. So once the alignment is right, I can start to close that back up again, and that forms one half of the joint. Now doing the other half is pretty much the same sort of principle. It's just a question of lining up those holes. You can see how that's squeezing through, and that's pretty much it. Same thing on the other side, and that is essentially it. So they need to be cleaned up now and tidied up a little bit, and then the edges where they overlap need to be cleaned up a bit as well to accommodate for the actual joint movement. But that's essentially the principle. So once that's cleaned up a bit, it starts to freewheel move a little bit better, and then once it's fully cleaned up and polished, what I'll end up with is the same type of joints that you see there in the wrist. That's the finished wrist. So I still have to make 2 more of the joints for the wrist, but I've got the parts pre-cut for that already, so it's just a matter of drilling the little holes and working out the final little alignment pieces and everything else so that they all move and align properly. The fingers, I've started working out the final placement for that sort of stuff. All this sort of stuff has to be done prior to the final polish, so that I'm not messing up the polish work that I've done towards the end. So this is all just a pre-test assembly to make sure that the components sort of move and operate pretty much the way that they're supposed to do, that the pistons are set in place and still have a little bit of movement in the base, so that when it comes to moving in the wrist and the actual movement of the pistons themselves, that they don't get in the way of anything. You can see the elbow movement. The elbow moves independently of the cuff as well, so that there's rotation in the forearm. That elbow piece is pretty close to finished, but it still has to have some of the final detail cut back into it as well. So within the next day or so, I should be getting to the final assembly stage for the left arm. Once I get this done, the reason why I've gone for this bit first is it means that I should be able to get the top half of the body finished and get all those chest pistons and all the rest of it, that final stuff, put in place. In the next video, I'll probably be demoulding my first part, which is the resin skull. You can see all the other resin pieces there, all wrapped up nice and safe, waiting for their individual mould pieces to be made. I'm going to start with the head and the hands first, because they're probably the most complicated pieces to work out, and then move on to the other pieces from there. So anyway guys, that's the update for now. Hope you like this one. Talk to you next time.